When you're looking at buying assets, you want to be buying assets in the top 25% of performance. So I've gone out and I have put an offer in on another business. It's very early days, so I don't know if it will be accepted yet. But this is kind of a bit more like how I wanted my channel to be run. It's more about the day-to-day, in the trenches, things that happen in property development, investing, owning businesses, and so that you guys can learn from my experiences. It goes without saying that this is not any form of personal financial advice. This is just general advice, and by going past this point in the video, you agree to be bound by the terms and conditions which have been linked in the description section of this video. Look, this offer could get refused or rejected, or something could happen in due diligence. This is not a fluff video on, buying the business for no money down and all of that type of stuff. It's a genuine cash offer around that $500,000 mark on a business. It's a small business, obviously. So I continue to invest in property development deals, commercial property shares, and other types of investment. But there are some significant advantages in owning business. And this is why I wanted to talk to you today about the advantages of owning a business over being a PAYG employee, as well as a way that businesses actually boost your ability to buy other types of investing. So let's get into it. The first area that most people make the mistake in is they get burnt out in what they're doing, then they jump left of field and buy a small business in an area that they have absolutely no understanding as to what they are doing. For example, my experience is in real estate, and if I got burnt out, I might buy a cafe. Now the thing is running a cafe has an entirely different skill set to running a real estate business. Not only that is I've got all my knowledge in the real estate sector, I have all my contacts, so if there are problems with people that I know that I can call in that industry. I don't know any other cafe owners. And the final thing is I know how to benchmark that business, how it should be performing and what it should be looking like and what different types of people within that business should be doing. Whereas again, in a cafe, I have no benchmarking experience. So it's important, if you're considering a small business, look at an area that you have experience in. The next thing is capitalization, and this is how most small businesses fail. Basically, capitalization is how much cash you have within the business or how much cash you have outside of the business that you can invest in the business. Now, being a small business owner or business owner, it's totally different from being a PAYG employee. As an employee, you receive an income from that business every single month, provided you are employed by that business. Whereas being a business owner, in some months, you might not get an income from that business. You might have to put money into that business to be able to invest and grow the business, or just maintain the business if you have big lumpy projects where you only get paid every couple of months. So if you're going out buying a small business with the assumption that you're going to receive an income from day one, this can be flawed. You should think of buying businesses like an investment. You need to have a lot of capital outside of the business that you're buying in order to invest in it, and then you'll receive the dividends in future cash flows. In fact, sometimes it's actually a bad thing to be generating a profit rather than reinvesting in the business, because profit you're taxed at 30%, whereas reinvesting in the business, you will be taxed on the asset value increasing once you sell the business in the future. The next thing, which is super important, is the numbers. Now, I don't just mean keeping accurate financials and looking at them every couple of weeks as the business owner, knowing where your business is actually headed. It's also how you collect revenue. And the two important things that I think within any business is, firstly, being paid up front. There's two different types of businesses. There are businesses that collect all your costs up front and then you get paid at the back when you sell that good. Or there are other businesses where you collect all the revenue up front and then you pay your suppliers at the back. This is important because it reduces how much capital you need to invest and grow that business. The next type of subcategory of businesses is transactional businesses versus recurring revenue style of businesses. Transactional businesses is where the customer comes to you once for a good or service. A recurring revenue style of business is where that same customer comes to you multiple times and they pay you multiple times. There is a recurring revenue stream. My preference is always towards businesses that have a recurring revenue, because you only pay to acquire the customer once and you collect an income from that customer over multiple years. The fourth area of failure is inadequate due diligence when you're actually buying the business. I thought I was pretty detailed when I bought properties. When you're buying businesses, you're actually buying a liability, because if the previous business business owner has done something wrong and you're buying that business, your business can be held to account from the previous business owner, even though you didn't own the asset then. The final problem takes a long time to kill businesses, but I would say it is the main root cause of why most businesses fail, and that is the problem of not being able to distinguish between working on the business versus in the business. Now, working in the business might be doing things like fighting fires, solving customer complaints. Working on the business might be improving systems, because this is scalable. If you improve the system once, this means that every team member benefits from that improvement. It might be things like growing revenue in the business, because again, if you grow the revenue, you will effectively make more income, which will improve the value of your asset. So let's get on to the differences between being a PAYG employee versus the advantages of owning a small business. Firstly, let's talk about the cookie cutter that most people do. They go to university, they get a job, they then buy a house, they pay it off, and then they think about investing. So we'll talk about that in the context of owning a small business. So first thing first is they get employed by ABC Proprietary Limited. ABC Proprietary Limited pays them a wage, but before they even get that wage, what happens is the ATO collects effectively 30% of whatever you earn. So you only get 70% of your wage. So at the end of every month or week or whenever you get paid, you effectively get 30% less of the income which you have received. Then you go out and buy a house. Now, there are three key disadvantages of buying a house versus owning a small business. The first one is basically all your payments you make on that house are post-tax. So for every dollar you put into that house, you actually have to earn $1.30. The second thing is you pay stamp duty when you buy that home. And the final thing is the interest which you're paying on that loan is not deductible, meaning that the interest as well as the principal which you're paying off the property is effectively 30% more, because you have to factor into account tax. Firstly, I want to caveat this in saying is the example I gave for a PAYG employee was someone at the start of their career. And the example I'm going to give you behind is someone who is probably been 5 or 10 years into their career and have decided that they want to go out and buy a small business. So yes, their capacity is totally different, but I just wanted to draw the distinction so that you kind of understand the stage in life where the person or the buyer is at on the small business. Remember, I talked about capitalization. So the first thing is if you're looking at buying a business, what you need to consider is how you capitalize it. Say for example, we have a property, we get a line of credit or we get a cash out facility, a loan. That loan then gets put into a trust, and then that trust buys the shares within the business. The other thing which I've talked about up here is the person might also have cash. So you might use cash to fund the purchase of the business through the trust, or a smarter thing to do would to put that money or that cash into the loan. So then you have a float. You have a float facility where basically as you receive income from the business, it pays down the loan, or if you need money to expand the business, you can draw down on that loan. So it gives you the flexibility. The other thing which is very interesting or advantageous for being a small business owner is you do not pay duties when you purchase shares within a business. It's crazy, I know, when you buy a property in terms of a real estate investment, you pay stamp duty to buy it. This loan account for me is the key which allows me to grow my portfolio. Basically, I can go out and put cash offers on this business and other investments, and I can leverage my negotiation position. Then my other businesses effectively pay down this loan account, and then the investment assets grow over time, and that increases the balance that I can have in my loan account, which I can then deploy into future investments. So let's talk a little bit about how do you actually grow your portfolio with the acquisition of small businesses. The first part of building a large portfolio is buying quality investments, whether that be property developments, commercial property, or businesses. They're all the same. And for that reason, if you want to learn more about that stuff, you should hit the subscribe button, throw me a comment below, and tell me if you found this video helpful, because it's the first one I've done on small business, and I'd be keen to hear your feedback. Now I wanted to talk about how businesses can boost your overall investment portfolio. So the two things that you need when growing your portfolio is number one, good assets, and number two is you need leverage. because it's assets multiplied by the leverage, which equals your return on equity. And return on equity is what you need to consider when you are growing that portfolio. So why do businesses make good assets? Well, firstly, let's compare a business to a wage. When you look at a wage, effectively, the actual money that you make on a wage is a trade-off for time. And that means the amount of time multiplied by the dollar per time unit is the maximum that you are able to earn with a wage. And I'm not suggesting that we should go out all and quit our jobs in order to buy a business. That's not the case, but you should consider a small business in the context of your overall investment portfolio, because the differences between businesses, the dollar return for the business is infinite, because the only thing that caps a business growth is the amount of money that you can invest into that, and the growth factor, so how quickly that business is growing. The second thing with a business is you can borrow against a business. You can't borrow against a wage. So generally, business lending is in that secured higher risk category. So business loans are more expensive than asset loans. They're generally between 6 to 10%, but they're a lot cheaper than unsecured loans. Whereas when you have a wage, you actually can never borrow against the income you're receiving, because your income is never guaranteed. It's dictated by the employer. The final thing with businesses is the types of businesses which I like to buy. I like to pay no more than a 2 times multiple for the business income. So saying that this year's revenue times 2 is the maximum valuation for what I'd pay for that business. I'm then also looking for a 30 to 40% margin on the business, meaning that for every dollar that business comes through in revenue, 30 to 40% of that comes back in terms of profit. And this is the equivalent of a 15 to 20% dividend yield on the ASX. In the traditional sense, when you're growing a portfolio, your rent plus your wages is what dictates your income cover, which is your ability to service the debt. And at some point, your wage is capped out. So really, it is only your rent that is what's allowing you to grow your portfolio, or grow your servicing ability, which allows you to grow your portfolio. The thing with growing your portfolio is, think of it as gigantic balance, because when banks look at the ability to service and your equity, if you service and you have equity, guess what? You'll get the loan. If you service but don't have the equity, you won't get the loan. And if you don't service but have the equity, you still won't get the loan. When you are starting that investment journey, often your net income is high because you're not diverting any of your income to paying down debt or liabilities to grow your assets. So what you need to do is you need to use some of your income and put that into high growth assets. Those high growth assets will go up in time, and that will allow you to unlock equity, which will then give you the deposit to purchase future assets. But at some point, as you're growing those assets, you become asset heavy and income poor. This is where a small business steps in, because not only from that rent and not only from that wage, you're able to then use the business income to add to your interest cover ratio, which will then increase your borrowing capacity so that you tick both boxes on the bank's check to make sure that you're going to repay the debt. If you get anything from today's video, this is the crux of why small businesses help boost your returns when you are looking at growing an investment portfolio. Think of buying assets on a bell curve. Now, you've got cash flow assets on one bell curve, and you've got growth assets on the other bell curve. Now, the thing with cash flow assets and growth assets is they are mutually exclusive. The returns of cash flow assets, or what makes a good cash flow asset, doesn't necessarily correlate to what makes a good growth asset. In fact, quite the opposite. The bottom cash flow assets might also be the top growth assets. And the problem with this is that if you are looking to get all your boxes ticked, you're going to compromise somewhere. And the thing that most spruikers say is they make it easy to do an investment with them, and they say, oh, we can get you growth, we can get you cash flow. But when you're looking at buying assets, you want to be buying assets in the top 25% of performance on both bell curves. And you want to go, I need a cash flow asset today that suits my particular portfolio right now. I want to focus on the top 25% and buy a really good asset. And then when you come to growth, I want to buy a top 25% growth asset. But what I was coming back to is spruikers say, oh, it's easy, we can get both. Well, what they do is they put you into a higher cash flow asset, and you might get 7 to 8% returns. But in order to get those 7 to 8% returns, your growth factor is compromised. You might get 3 or 4% growth. I can guarantee you that the reasons why an asset is a good, strong growth asset is different to a cash flow asset. I've talked about that in previous videos. So when you are looking at cash flow and increasing your income servicing to get more leverage, the thing with small businesses is, as I said before, less than 2 times multiple, 30 to 40% margin, which means it's a 15 to 20% return on my equity. Now, I don't know many other assets that have a 15 to 20% return. Even good commercial property is 10%, maybe 12, and I'm really stretching it there. But this is almost double that. And this means if I focus on a really good cash flow business, which then I deploy into a growth business, and then I set up my loan structures in the way where I talked about previously, where you put your business structure, which is secure against the assets to get the low cost of lending, because remember, business loans are 6 to 7%, where asset loans are 2 to 3%. You are then able to each time leapfrog at a certain point, whereby when you need more cash flow, you buy assets to grow the business, and when you need more growth, you buy a growth asset. So now you know the advantages of a business over being a PAYG employee. You also understand how I structure things in terms of having a loan that the business income pays down, which I reuse to redeploy into other investments. And you also know the importance of only focusing on cash flow or growth assets, not trying to get both, and always trying to target the top 25% of performance. So until your next investment, whatever that might be a small business like me, might be something else, or my next video, best of luck and goodbye.